Hello, YouTube. I hope that everyone is doing very well today. Thank you for joining me. What you will hear are the ramblings of an agitated man who initially took an indirect expression of hostility towards me. You will hear him referring to philosophers and intellectuals. This is code for me. Maybe he does not know how to address another directly. I do. We are speaking about one who identifies himself as Eagle Eye 1975. However, his inabilities are not my concern. There is a certain breed of white man. Taxonomic classification is necessary here because of the subject matter, who actively participates in the cult of political volleyball. Normally, they self-identify as right-wing or conservative and have a propensity to assume the new oppressed minority position, probably in need of a civil rights movement, because currently they are sitting at the back of the bus. Oh man, yes, I know, I'm exaggerating a little. Anyway, of course, economic anxieties are feeding those racial and/or male fears. This just confirms certain whites have never really felt terribly secure in their majority status. Unfortunately, historical conversations become even more convoluted with this type of person because within them, the very definition of being an American is going through a profound change. At least this is what I reason. I also reason this is compounded, the situation is compounded, because certain white people see themselves as individuals and not as members of a race. They have that luxury. However, if the issue of concern is something like the Confederate flag, Confederacy, or slavery, people tend to be well seated in their prejudices, let's say. Instead of examining the historical data and participating in an adult exchange, they see any opposition to their worldview, to what they have been taught, as some sort of progressive tirade. Oh God, and then you are labeled as being dogmatic, but they will never consider themselves to be suffering from a cognitive bias. Oh no, no, no. Oh no, there can never be an error of inductive inference towards confirmation of the hypothesis under study. Oh no. It can be tiring to converse with people like this, especially when they give you a window into their psychology. Speaking of the ones that somehow feel persecuted and that others have been indoctrinated to silently condone their destruction. The double standard is firmly rooted in identity politics and stylish theories about victimization. Anyway, do listen up. I will come back and address a couple of issues.
The thing that really bothers me is that it's almost like these people are emotionally invested in it because they want to flog themselves and on the altar of political correctness and prostrate themselves and say, I'm not worthy of any sort of, consideration as a human being because my ancestors were white and racist and slave owners. There's been this slow march towards altering the view of the straight white male to be disgusted at themselves for being straight, white, and male. Because it's like we're supposed to judge ourselves for the category that we are in, recognize our straight privilege, recognize our male privilege, and recognize our white privilege, so that we know just how scummy we are based on the group we belong to. But we're not allowed to judge other people based on the group they belong to, the color of their skin, the gender that they have, or the sexual orientation that they have, because that would be wrong. But we're supposed to judge ourselves for that.
flag alert! Red flag alert! Red flag alert! Yes, in both of these videos, he is all over the place. This segment was much later in his original video, but I believe it provides insight into his psychological disposition. I surely do not care about any view regarding the altering of the straight, white male. I have stated in many videos, we need to examine the person based on what they show us. That I find discernment to be a wonder of a tool. That before rendering a decision, we should consider the importance of divorcing ourselves from our preconceptions, cognitive distortions, and magical thinking. In short, humans would be better off if we resisted anything that brings us to self-deception and lack of insight. It takes a sick person to want another to be disgusted with themselves due to phenotypical traits and sexuality expression. Judge yourself for the category you are in? Really? How about comprehending that different states of being brings privilege, depending upon your geographical location and who's in power, etc.? A concept whose truth can be proven should be accepted for what it is. I am not interested in anyone's self-flogging or using this information to reduce another in worth. Displays of one's character and actions does that and does not require outside assistance. Your meat suit is what you are provided. What is vastly more interesting is what makes a person tick. I do not care if you or another estimate my worth. What you think of me is your business. So stop whining. Really?
Took a tertiary statement and then seemed to imply that the expectation was that I define all of my terms perfectly and give all sufficient backup evidence for various positions. No, I'm sorry. I'm not going to take a 5-minute ramble as I'm about to go to bed and turn it into an hour-long lecture with fully cited sources and such. It's this whole, I'm going to require the peer-reviewed academic type of standards when it's obvious the intent of what was said was more along the lines of casual conversation. And you see this all the time, once again, with the fake internet philosophers and argumentative people who just want to be right and want you to be wrong in order to stroke their own ego somehow, and
Oh boy, where to begin? It is a very human tendency to believe that we are smarter or better than others. When we fail, we often rationalize and make excuses. Some do this in part to protect their self-esteem, but in doing so, they lack the self-insight that would allow them to improve. What a liar you are! I have no expectation of you that I do not have of myself. If you are going to address a topic like the Confederate flag and slavery, then hasty movements and lack of attention to detail is not only marked by lack of intellectual acuity, but laziness. Do you get that, sunshine? Also, the issue of contention was not about you defining terms. I was speaking to an individual that commented on your video. In your failed alpha male attempt to control the situation, you butted in. When you did, you assume the exact physicalness of another. So you were he? because I don't remember speaking to you when I was asking him to truly define terms. Though I did request of you one thing. I'll get to that. So stop blubbering because you were called on your laziness. I do not expect anyone to be perfect in their presentations on YouTube, even if they're giving a scholarly presentation. Many people make mistakes. I do frequently. Again, your first comment to me was you butting into a conversation that was not directed to you. I addressed you after the fact. You partially quoted me when you first spoke with me, stating, quote, easing out of a practice which is horrific, end quote. Then you went on to say, quote, that's just it. You see it as horrific. From the perspective of damn near everyone back then, it wasn't so horrific. You have to put yourself in their shoes. Try to think like people thought at that time, end quote. Those were your words. And then I stated to you, just to keep you on the straight and narrow, let me remind you, I said, it is not mandatory or necessary that I place myself in their shoes. This is not merely mind dependent, which is your implication, nor do I have any interest in acting as an apologist for those people being slave owners, or those people being those who supported others to be slave owners. I went on to say, I am sure if I wanted to give time to the challenge, I can make a grand argument that an objective morality exists which would condemn this action. And I went on to state, I am not yet motivated, end quote. You became heated when I followed up quoting you from your video content. Do you remember stating in your first video, quote, the Confederacy itself was not as much a pro-slavery group of people as much as it was a group that said we want to do what we want to do. A charter we are under, namely the United States Constitution, does not allow you to tell us we cannot do these things, end quote. I said to you, quote, this is so whacked, I do not know where to begin. I will leave it here for now. Do you have proof, or is this personal belief passed off as verified information? Oh, so wanting verified information, even giving you an easy out so that you didn't have to give it. You could have said it was your personal belief, or you could have said, no, it's this or that. But wanting verified information was some extraordinary expectation. Oh, that's right. You have a privilege, huh? To make emphatic declarations as if no supporting evidence or at least expounding on your claim is necessary. Now, did you not claim you are a teacher or desired to be? Heaven forbid anyone taking instruction from you. Listen up, teacher wannabe, from someone who has taught both elementary school, high school, and college. So listen up. Whenever you express your view on a subject, you made an assertion or a claim. If being credible matters to you, then an assertion needs to be proved, or at least needs to be rationally addressed. Get it together, or get out of the profession. We don't need people like you.
They passed a measure to ban the Confederate flag. It was like some vote of 70-something to 1. There was one person who voted against it. And of course, that person is automatically racist. This is the kind of legislation. The reason why you have to be very careful about thought policing and, allowing that kind of bullying tactic to work, because it actually impacts these kinds of things. The Confederate flag, they said, is some sort of symbol of hatred and oppression, which is, of course, same thing that could be said for the swastika for the Nazis.
it might be too much to request that you stop behaving like a muggins, but of course, people of this ilk can never get why many Black Americans detest the Confederate flag. They conveniently think it's about political correctness, that it's about being liberal. Yeah. We are not speaking of group victimization that requires a foundational principle for political correctness. No, we are speaking of something completely different. Clueless, rebel, hopeful. Many just see it as an overt symbol of racism due to historical records, due to historical happenings. It is not only tied to the history of racial slavery in the United States, but also the establishment of Jim Crow laws by Southern states following the end of Reconstruction in the late 1870s. All the points that I have shared thus far in regards to history, I learned in public schools. Now, do not get me started in regards to all of the history courses that I took while in college. Actually, I took 4 years worth of history while in college. Yeah. However, you would never know that because you assume as if you have a clue about my educational achievements. Well, fuck you. Now let's get back to this. Oh, and just in case you didn't know, Sunshine, what I'm speaking about when referring to Jim Crow, I'm talking about when racial segregation was enforced within state borders for nearly a century. You think that that may leave a bad taste in one's mouth when a symbol is connected to that. Well, I think so. Also, many will not tolerate it because certain hate groups use the Southern Cross as one of the symbols associated with their organizations. One that comes to mind is the neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. Now, let's not leave out the separatist organizations such as the Aryan Nations. As I always like to point out, the official flag of the Ku Klux Klan, as stated by the organization itself, is actually the flag of the United States of America, not the Confederate States of America battle flag. Oh, you silly mental midget you. Yeah, you deserve that. There may be many alternative reasons as to why one is opposed to your supposed knowledge. So I will say a little more about political correctness, since this is a favorite among the neoconservative, the right-winger, the traditionalist, the libertarian, racial bigot, and the Fox News watching Tea Party guard dogs. And let's not forget the die-in-the-wool Republicans who happen to be straight, white, male. Even one such as I, with my meager educational achievements, knows that political correctness acts as a supposed vanguard of those seeking the betterment of the people. Historical records of this can be found with Cambodia and China. I can give a shit about political correctness. I see the damage it can do. By what? Exploring history. I'd rather people like you not have that shield as well, since we are talking about political correct movement and the Confederate flag. I do not see Southern whites automatically as the victimizer group. I also have met Southerners who I personally know to be good people that do not attach any racial animosity to their worldview. I also know there are some who will automatically see Southern culture, Southern ideas, and facts about the South as evil in its own right. This does not apply to me, Sunshine. Unlike you, Eagle Eye 1975, I do not imply that someone who does not agree with me is part of the problem. Now, I know that the radical abolitionists did a non-PC move and attacked the Southern slaveholders and the South. It is also stated, though contested by some, that they also changed the debate about slavery. One camp was stating that slavery was a poor political choice, and then the bad radical abolitionists supposedly presented another point of view, one that stated that slavery was actually something that needed to be fought because it was a sin. So there was an issue regarding the movement against the sin of slavery. This actually made it difficult, if not impossible, to ease out of this practice, which was horrific. This redefining of the debate made gradual emancipation or compromise impossible. Salt was rubbed in the wound because the North was able to implement an option not open to the South. This just made things a little bit uneasy within the country.
The big debate leading up to the Civil War was more of, does the federal government have the right to tell the states that they can't have slavery? But the thing that I think a lot of people need to understand is that the Confederacy itself was not as much a pro-slavery group of people as it was a group who said, we want to do what we want to do, and the charter that we are under, namely the United States Constitution, does not allow you to tell us we can't do these things.
You don't have the right to make me give up my slaves. I want to separate from the Union. Yes, I get that I am becoming weary of mocking you. So let me start to wrap this up. So I get that there are many reasons why a state, for example, may want to succeed. A state mainly filled with conservatives may be fed up with what they see as liberal overreaching. Maybe the conservative activists who have the ear of the GOP have decided that they have finally come to their wits' end, trying to effect political change through usual channels of bills, votes, and a churn of election cycles. So they plot a drastic move. Da 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 da! They decide to form their own states. The reason for the movement away from the Union should make a huge difference as to if it is seen as legitimate. If memory serves, didn't West Virginia succeed or splinter from Virginia in 1863? I think then Virginia belonged to the Confederacy. As long as people are discontent regarding frustration due to their state or the local government not properly representing them, we will have this desire to separate. As long as we have the founding principles shit upon, we will have people who wish to separate. As long as we treat America like a democracy versus the constitutional republic that it was meant to be, we will have those that want to separate. Some even see this option as viable because they reason it will cease the infighting of states and would provide people more control over their area. So yes, I can see how there would be legitimate reasons as to why one would want to separate. However, to imply or to state that the people should have the right to separate at any time, I'm not sure I'm on board with that. Now, I am on board with individual choice. So there is a conflict there. I have yet to resolve this conflict. However, as morally deplorable as one wanting to own slaves, as one who wants to promote their economic interests at the cost of another human life, yeah, I think that they should not be given the right to succeed.
About the slavery thing, people seem to be wedded to the idea that slavery was the driving force behind the Civil War. They didn't want to lose their economic power. It just so happened that their economic power came from having free labor. And because they needed the free labor in order to maintain their economic power, they then justified the use of that free labor by saying, well, it's not like they're human beings anyway. So the racism in Dehumanizing was a post hoc justification for the continued use of the slaves in order to maintain their economic power. There seems to be some confusion about what I said in my video regarding the Confederate flag ban. Specifically, the statement that slavery was not the primary driving force behind the Civil War. And in typical internet asshole fashion, some people will tend to take a all or nothing view when I'm trying to be nuanced, and when I say something that's all or nothing, they will flip to being nuanced. So it's like, when I speak in generalities, they want to speak in specifics. When I speak in specifics, they want to speak in generalities. And all of that is nothing more than an attempt to one-up the other person by, saying, ah ha ha, see, I'm right and you're wrong, ha 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 ha. And it's nothing but ego-stroking that you see from a lot of people who fancy themselves to be philosophers or intellectuals of some sort or another. And this is the thing that really upsets me about a lot of our history. We spend so much time laboring over the stinking slavery issue. I mean, it's America's original sin, and it's like, it was the defining thing of the time, and it still has its scars and its stains on our society to this day. And it's really sad because there was a lot of other things that happened in the 1800s since the founding of our country, all the way up through the Civil War. It's like people become so focused on that one stinking issue that they don't see the rest of the forest. What about after the Civil War ended? The Reconstruction period. I mean, just from an economics point of view, that was probably one of the times in our country's history where we were free of foreign entanglements, taxes were low, markets were amazingly free, and we saw some of the greatest economic growth in our nation's history. But people only talk about the wars. They only talk about the strife. Basically, from 1870 all the way through 1900, 30 frickin' years, we had some of the most amazing economic stability of our history as a country. But nobody talks about it. And so, this is where I think you get these legislators that want to just pass a law to ban the Confederate flag because they want to be seen as being anti-racist. They want to be seen as being the ones who care. They want to be seen as being the ones who, are standing up for the little guy, that kind of thing. And it's just posturing. And it's incorrect. And it displays an actual lack of understanding of history. But don't you dare talk against it, because you'll be labeled a racist. But really, people seem to think that because the white people were racist and saw the blacks as being subhuman and thus capable of being used as farm animals, that justified slavery. But they have it backwards. They see the racism first. They see the dehumanizing first. They think that the Southerners were like, well, but these people aren't really people. They're just, they're subhumans, and so it's okay for us to enslave them. No, and this is where it all comes down to. The slavery was important to their economics. And so the chain is like this. The primary concern was we don't want to lose our economic power. We also don't want to lose our political power, because if the slaves are freed, then, what's going to happen to us in the federal legislatures and stuff. But the economic power was paramount. That was the primary driving thing behind the Civil War.
Oh, the fun never stops. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Actually, he has not shown himself to be qualified to state what the order of things was. He is qualified to yield an opinion in regards to this, however. It is not possible, in my opinion, to make a definitive statement here regarding the order of things as he puts it. For example, to appease this person, let's say this was correct, his position in the beginning. As time passed, he does not know if this held true. If he does, then show the evidence or shut up. The classical empires of Rome and Greece were based on slave labor. Ancient slavery was not viewed in racial terms. However, should we trust any documentation of that time, speaking of the time that slavery occurred in America, should we trust any documentation of that time which came from criminals? This includes accomplices to those acts. So we have managerial participants, the overseers, raiders, slavers, and merchants. We must also include certain members of the international community as accessories. Of course, this makes them what? Guilty of perpetuating a crime against humanity. I say it is reasonable that you would have to see someone as intrinsically inferior to justify destroying his or her freedom, obliterating family ties, which encompassed the transatlantic slave trade, constituted slave trading, and slavery. I have no problem stating that slavery within America roots are based in economic realities, institutional realities, systemic realities, and transnational dimensions. But this has nothing to when blacks encountered racism as we know it today. The other thing that raises a flag for consideration is that when we consider what he states, we see no consideration being given to the events taking place concurrently, or at the same time. What an idiot! You would have to have the ability to dehumanize a person before enslaving them. We are not capable of probing the mind to determine when racism, as we know it today, surfaced. Yes, other groups were slaves, and yes, blacks even owned slaves in America. However, this does not eradicate the reality that the entire process, as it relates to blacks, was indeed anti-black.
The college course I took in this subject specifically, I would rather believe my professor. I choose to believe my professor in this course more than I believe what some random asshole on the internet tries to pass off on me. Especially when that random asshole on the internet is parroting everything I was taught in my public schooling in high school, and they show no signs that they have any sort of formal education in this subject. I don't care if if you have a degree in chemical engineering, that doesn't mean you know about the Civil War from the perspective of higher education. It doesn't mean you actually would probably have had to take at least some sophomore level, maybe even freshman level college classes in U.S. American history. The way that the professor decided to organize the class was he's like, basically from the time of the founding of our country to the Reconstruction, slavery was the biggest issue that pervaded everything. But it wasn't the top issue at all ever in, but it always underlied everything. Everything was influenced by slavery for that entire period of our history. But there were other considerations. So what he's saying is that yes, it was a major cause of a lot of strife and problems, but it was not the primary cause and it was not the only cause, but it underlied everything.
So I'm feeling the need to wrap this up. Now, I know he thinks he is teaching others. We already see that he has no issue constructing vague ideas and placing confidence in such. My subscribers have never, ever heard me identify or saw me identify in the comments section myself as an internet philosopher or even an intellectual. This must be his defensive posturing. We know he places thoughts in the marketplace of ideas, yet expects them not to be challenged? Come on now. We also understand that when put on the spot, his response is that one is seeking to be ego-stroked from a stranger. Yeah, I'm wondering how that is supposed to have merit for me. What is my payoff? Nothing. We can see his antagonistic march. No skin off my teeth, but his managed tirade that I mentioned to him in his comment section is nothing more than him doing some sort of passive-aggressive maneuver. Oh, I digress. So, let's get back on target. I made clear when speaking to the other guy that justifying slavery, meaning the other guy that I was speaking to originally in his comment section, I made it clear when speaking to him that justifying slavery, speaking of anyone that upholds this treatment of humans past or present, demonstrates the defectiveness of psychological function within mankind. The other person I was addressing before Eagle Eye 1975 stood his ground on his comment page posted, "Slavery was a minor point of contention." I took offense to that. Now, this has nothing to do with emotions. It has to do with common sense and sound reasoning and not some sort of progressive regurgitation. Now, this minor contention, as I had stated before, may be true in regards to policymakers. However, the issue of state sovereignty and also the interpretation of the 10th Amendment was part of the driving force. This said, I still disagree that slavery was a minor contention. And if I am not mistaken, we know this is not true only from a state sovereignty versus federal authority standpoint. It goes so much deeper than that. Black labor, not speaking of black slavery. Now we are getting to the parts I learned in freshman year of college history, was introduced into the United States in 1619. When a Dutch ship unloaded a cargo of 20 blacks, I think it was. These humans were sold as indentured servants under contractual conditions similar to those of their white counterparts. Even though the yearly imports of blacks at this time were claimed not to be large, the importation combined with other factors to induce a subtle change in the attitude of white settlers toward color servants was mandatory. Outside of what some would consider market imperfections, the rate of return on black slave capital equaled the market rate, even though this was supposedly declining. Therefore, the determination of the return to slaveholding, while of concern because of the widespread uncertainty regarding its magnitude, was of little value in answering. The question seemed to be more relevant, whether the industry was viable. This was estimated by ascertaining whether it showed characteristics of a declining industry, Some of these are, now let me see here. Yeah, some of these are: 1, a declining rate of production of slave birth rate; 2, a declining demand for female slaves used to produce the unique capital or human product used in the industry; and 3, a declining demand for slaves. I will say this again. Many elements, especially on the right, want to erroneously declare this war, this civil war, was fought primarily over states' rights and the limits of federal power in a union of states. This is nothing more than a shield. It's only part of the equation. Now, I stated on the comment section openly that if I was incorrect, I would love to see verifiable evidence that corrects my position. I think that that is a reasonable request, because I do not want to pass disinformation or misinformation. I stand by my original point. That was, the Civil War was also very much about slavery. When we consider property rights, how could it not be? The property in question being approximated in the millions of slaves that suffered and worked daily in the South at that time. What clutters historical fact is the issue regarding volition, policy, religion, banking, and slavery, meaning the nuances that surrounded or orbited slavery. It was indeed about slavery, the Civil War. I'm not stating it was in its totality. Indeed, the Civil War was about slavery, and I have not been satisfied to take a new position that would go against this not being one of significance, not some minor contention, but not from the standpoint about ending control over a something thought to be less than human. More so, it was over who had the power to decide whether the institution of slavery was acceptable. So, state rights came into the picture due to local institutions' position versus the central government power. However, most of what I just stated I placed in your comment section, but you admittedly did not read the bulk of what I had written because you thought I was presenting you with a wall of information in order to win. I don't care about winning, you stupid little man. What I cared about was having an adult exchange so that maybe I can learn something new, maybe we can widen this idea that you were expanding upon in your video. But in order for me to do so, I had to make sure I understood where you were coming from and why you had the thoughts that you did. However, you were so butthurt that you could not even answer some simple questions. Yet you found it to be appropriate to interject yourself into a conversation that was not geared towards you. How pathetic your behavior was, and I believe it probably paints you clearly. What a shame. I hope that you get your act together, because we really do not need teachers like you, because I think that you are a disgrace from what I have seen thus far for teachers throughout the United States. Thank you for your consideration.